So hi there, welcome to you all. I'm very pleased to welcome you for this opening talk of our 2022 SciComm Academy Lecture Series. Today we've invited Martijn Peters, a science communicator at DPG Media, one of the largest media groups in Belgium, to give his personal take on science communication. But first, I briefly want to introduce myself. My name is Arno Zonderman. I'm a coordinator of SciMigo, a non-profit organization that is the organizer of this SciComm Academy. You might know us from other projects such as Scriptieprijs, the Vlaamse Scriptieprijs and the Vlaamse PhD Cup. The SciComm Academy is one of our most recent projects. We launched this in the fall of 2021. And basically, I think the project title says it all, but it's an academy for science communication. So an academy through which we want to guide researchers who want to communicate about their research to a larger audience. So definitely have a look at our website here, where you can discover the entire program. We have some training courses on, amongst others, popular science writing, podcasting, infographics, and such. So make sure to visit the website. And what is also important to know is that in the coming months, we'll have some other interesting talks, interesting lectures, amongst others by Kasha Patel, which is who is an American science journalist at the Washington Post and also a comedian. And she will make a plea for using jokes, even when addressing serious scientific issues. We'll also have talk on how scientists can use social media to their best advantage. That's something that Martijn Peters is also very experienced in, and perhaps will also briefly discuss during his talk. But then we'll also have like other talks on from amongst others, Thierry Carpenter, which is an American science writer, who will talk about how scientists can themselves identify interesting story angles in their own research to attract the attention of the press. So definitely check out the website. But today we're of course here to listen to Martijn Peters. I'm very happy to have him here as the opening speaker of the SciComm Academy Lecture Series. Martijn himself is a scientist. He obtained a PhD degree in biomedical sciences, if I'm correct, at the University of Hasselt. But what is very interesting is that from an early stage in his career, he already started to invest a lot of time and effort in science communication, something that we really have been able to follow on social media, how he managed to grow an audience and kind of became like a scientific influencer, if I can put it that way. And what is really nice is that Martijn was able to make science communication his profession. I think first, after obtaining his PhD degree, he worked as a science communicator at the University of Hasselt. But in the meantime, he has become a science communicator at, as I mentioned, DPG Media, one of the largest media groups in Belgium. I think, Martijn, you once told me that you were a good scientist, but you were a better science communicator. So it kind of makes sense that you stumbled into this career. So we're ready to listen to your talk titled Science We Need to Talk. So the floor is yours, Martijn.
Thank you, Arnoud, for this very kind introduction. And it's an honor for me to do the opening lecture today. It's true. I once said that, but the story was between me and my wife, that my wife, who also did a PhD in biomedical sciences, we met during our education. She was a way better researcher than I will ever be. While my passion was, of course, science communication. But let's start our story of today. So we all have fond memories of our grandparents. I am no exception. But my grandfather, who you can see here in this picture with me when I was still a very little boy, he holds a special place in my life because my journey that I will embark with you on today starts with him. He was a retired forest keeper. So he guarded the forest of the famous park in Limburg called Bokrijk. For people who've ever been there, that's a place where you can ride a bike through water or in the forests. And he was a forest keeper over there, and then he retired. And during the summer holidays, I often went to my grandparents' house, and he took me on all kinds of adventures through these forests and told me everything he knew about the world around us, like how the animals lived, which animals, which plants they were. These were amazing things to do when I was little. I think we spent hundreds of hours together in that forest. And in those forests, the scientist in me was unleashed, as to say. So there was simply no stopping me. And the result is that I'm sitting here in front of all of you today to talk a bit about science. Now, Arnoud already told you, my name is Martin. I'm a professional science communicator. I work with DPG Media. I used to be a PhD student, then a science communication officer for Hasselt University, and then a professional science communicator at DPG Media, where I coordinate as well as produce content myself for the news side of the company, because the company has two pillars: the commercial side, which is like the TV programs that you see. Sometimes I consult on these programs, but these are separate. And then you have the news side of the company, and that's the side that I mainly work for. But sometimes you can also hear me on the radio stations or see me in a TV program. But for those of you who watch VTM TV programs, you'll probably know Lieve Scherer more than, or see him more than you will see me, for example, because I mainly focus on the news side of science. Today, I'm going to tell you about my story as a science communicator, what it was like for me and what I have learned so far. So I already told you all how it started, but let's skip a few years. In fact, let's go all the way back to the end and talk about the past 2 years, because me and countless other scientists suddenly had to communicate with the world about a new kid on the block called SARS-CoV-2, the new coronavirus, which still haunts our society today. This damn pandemic doesn't let us loose. It's keeping its grip tight, although if we focus on the progression of the disease, it seems to be getting better. But it's a perfect example to start my journey of today, but why we need to talk about science, why we have to do science communication, as to say so. And I divided it in 5 E's. So for me, there are 5 E's that are important when we talk about science communication, on the reasons why you can do science communication or should do. Some people say we all have to do it. Some people say you can do it. I'm a bit on the latter camp, in the sense that I think it should be a free choice and not mandatory for every scientist. Because, like I said in the beginning of this talk, there are good researchers and there are good science communicators. You don't have to be both of them. You can be, but you don't have to be. Let's start with the first E. And that's the fact that I have to put this one. Sorry, it's the water vapor device that suddenly turned on. I had to put it off. The first one is the fact that we can be eye-opening through science communication. So science is everywhere in our lives, from the medicine that we take to the devices that we use. The fact that I'm able to present to you today through my smartphone coupled to my laptop with an external microphone for some better audio. The impact of science is enormous on our life. Every day we use stuff that without science would not exist in this world. And by communicating to society, we have the opportunity to open their eyes to the wonders of science, to paint a realistic image of what science is, how it works, and the purpose of science, because often people have no idea about this. And also, I think it's very important, if we don't do it, other people will hijack the conversation, and they will do it. And once that they've done it, there's only one modus operandi that we go into, and that is damage control. But in my opinion, when you have to do that, it's always too late, and you're running behind the facts. And those people that will have hijacked the conversation, they will always have an advantage compared to you. And also for the researchers among you who are currently listening, There's also a bit of self-interest, of course, in the eye-opening fact, because when you open people's eyes to the societal value of your research, it also ensures the continuation of this. You might think that what you do is the most important thing in the world and everyone should think the same, but that's not necessarily a shared value with the rest of society. This is especially hard for people in beta sciences and stuff like that, so that to really and the hardcore science like physics, try explaining to someone in society why searching for a Higgs boson particle might be interesting. So if you can open people's eyes to everything that science contributes, it might be easier to ensure continuation and to ensure function. Something that I experienced a lot when I was the science communicator officer for Hasselt University. I constantly went around and talked to scientists, and they always told me stuff like, yeah, why do people not know what I'm doing? Why are our funding agencies not interested in the type of research that I'm doing? Because it's very important. But scientists simply never talked to people about their research. So how can they know? Even I see it often when working together with researchers nowadays or with the press agencies of university, and I call them, do you have someone in-house who's working on this? They say, we don't know. We have to call ourselves, and they have to start calling around to the different departments and to ask, do you have a scientist that's working on, for example, volcanoes or something like that. So even the press agencies of universities have no clue what their scientists are doing. So how can everyone else know about it? So you have the opportunity by doing science communication to open the eyes of everyone around you, your own departments, the departments around you, other scientists, your press agencies, journalists, funding agencies. So that's an opportunity as a researcher. The second E is that science communication gives us the opportunity to educate people, to show them the way and to provide them with more information on certain topic, because information is often easily accessible for a lot of fields, but for science, this is not always the case. On one side, based to the high technicality of the things that we do and the jargon, although jargon is not only limited to science, we often get a lot of frustration because of it from other people. But when I started working here on in DPG Media, I was bombarded with journalism jargon, and they all acted like it was completely normal. They said, can you make this type and that type, and can you do this, that, with all kinds of abbreviation to it mean stuff, which I had no idea what they mean, but every journalist knows what they mean. So it's not solely limited to us. But science is not easy accessible, the information. And by doing science communication, we give people the opportunity to have access to that information, to educate themselves. You could kind of have or find it a moral duty to make knowledge accessible for those who are interested and want to learn more. And also, on a side note, we cannot only use it for educating others, but also for educating ourselves. That's certainly a plus side of doing science communication, because whenever I worked on a science communication project, I put some pictures here for example, the University of Flanders or Poep Simple, which was a format on the national television VRT, where you could explain in 1 minute, I think it was, your research with all kinds of fun animation. I did it at the Gravesteen in Ghent, which is like a castle or fortress in the middle of the city center. But during these things, I learned a lot myself, even though it was often my own research. I learned more about neurological disease when I did a presentation for the University of Flanders, or gave lectures about Alzheimer's, dementia. I also learned more about how things work, because in order to explain something, you really have to know how it works. It's really easy to hide behind difficult jargon, to hide the fact that you don't know something yourself. So by doing science communication, we can provide knowledge to others, but also ourselves. I think that's something that is very important. And I think what we are doing right now is a perfect example of that. By the Science Communication Academy of SciMingo, you have access to knowledge that would not be available, because knowledge about science communication, it's particularly hard to find. I did a lot of things by trial and error. Luckily, for everyone watching, that is not the case anymore in Flanders these days. There are a lot of initiatives. It's really cool to see now that it's all bundled into one organization, or organization where you can follow different kinds of workshops to learn different stuff like podcasting, writing an article, doing a pitch in front of a video, which could be also later used for television work. But making knowledge accessible is a really important thing about why you could do science communication. And that also brings me to the third E, and that is to empower. Because if you educate people, you also empower them to make better decisions. That's the case for all of us. The more informed we are, the better our decisions are. So it's in our best interest to provide decision makers. That can be politicians, but that can also be people within your university. That can be other type of organizations like conservation organization within the fields of biology, to provide them with all type of information, the correct information, so that they can make their correct decision. This is, for example, something that I transferred to the media world, because I work as a science communicator or a scientist for a media company, and I help journalists in my coordination function with determining what is good science, what is bad science. I help them to make better decisions as a journalist on how to write, videograph, scientific content, how to do science communication as a journalist. So that's, for example, something that I provide these people with information so they can make more informed decisions. For example, before I started working, there was once a piece in VTM News where they invited a doctor, which said that we had to do measles birthday parties so that people did not have to get a measles vaccine anymore and stuff like that, which is something that these days would never happen on my watch if I'm aware of it. So you can have different kinds of influence on different types of decision makers in all kinds of fields by doing science communication. So this is just an example from my journey as a science communicator. The next E is one of the personal highlights for me as a science communication, and it's creating enthusiasm. Whenever you talk to a person, whether it is a decision maker or someone on the street, it's an opportunity to invoke enthusiasm. And it's just beautiful to share your passion with other people. And even I, as introvert as they get, even I get joy about sharing my passion with other people. So we all know that you don't do science for the big money. Science is definitely not a bad field when it comes to earning potential, but it's also, we are not among the creme de la creme of earning money. If I see what my brother-in-law makes in his law firm, science is okay. But we simply do, or a lot of us do it for our fascination with how the world works, our passion. And wouldn't it be great if you could instill that in other people, that passion, to share a bit of that, and maybe to also ensure succession in this type of manner? Because by sharing your passion as a science communicator, you can inspire the next generation. Never underestimate the power of a good first impression. If you will ask scientists, or most scientists, why did you ever embark on a journey of becoming a scientist, they probably will have these type of moments or people that inspired them or that made the click for them to go for a science education. So never forget that enthusiasm is very contagious. I saw it, for example, during the science battle, which I put some pictures on here, which is a competition organized by children and for children, by The Floor is Yours, where you have to present your research as a scientist in front of children. It was a wonderful experience, one of the highlights of my science communication career, still to this day. There is almost, in my opinion, nothing that tops children getting excited about science and say like, okay, I want to become a scientist too. I also have that on TikTok. We will come back to that later. But if you do science communication and there's like a kid or a person that comes to you and saying like, look, I never even considered becoming a scientist as a profession, and now I'm going to switch my educational path to sciences to become a scientist because I got inspired by you. As a scientist, that's one of the most beautiful things, to me at least, that can happen. Some people will probably say like, I would like to win a Nobel Prize, which is cool. But for me, that's the highlight of being a science communicator, at least. And that brings us to the final E. And what better way to inspire people than by being entertaining? Because it's okay if science communication is fun for your audience as well as for you. It also gives your life a new dimension as a scientist. There's also often a lot of critique that I see and that I used to get when I was still a PhD student. That even when you do science communication, it has to be serious, like almost like a conference presentation. It cannot be fun. You compromise yourself being yourself in the sense of you being a scientist. Let me state it like that you're compromised, that you're not a scientist anymore, which is in my opinion completely ridiculous, because you can be a scientist and have fun. Scientists are people too. I always find this really a really weird thing to say, that we have to be like really strict. So don't fall in what I call the community trap, that the community of scientists has to be a certain kind of way, like serious, nerdy, geeky. You cannot be interested in any other thing or be fun and laughable and stuff like that. If I sometimes get the most ridiculous critique about this, and I also know this from other science communications like Lieve, who get the same kind of bullocks over them. So never pay attention to these critics. But I also stated that this can give a new dimension to your science career, because when I still did my PhD, for me, it was the ideal way to let off some steam. I started vlogging back then. I don't do it anymore, but it was called OMG, It's Science. It was one of the first things that I did in my science communication career. I learned a lot from it, actually, how to edit videos. Also, I combined it a bit with Instagram at the end. So I learned also how to do photo editing. But this was really like a creative outlet for me, because the science was really serious, and you really have to go into depth and focus on little minute details of what can go wrong in your experiments. And this was like a creative outlet. I can show the world what I'm doing. I quickly switched this to Instagram, which because I quickly noticed when doing social media, which I still do to this day, that YouTube was kind of old, in the sense that there was no growth potential anymore. You have to have growth potential, otherwise you start doing this and you don't see the views, you don't see followers, because they're simple. YouTube was oversaturated at that time. So I switched in parallel with Twitter to Instagram, and I used my video skills in Instagram, and I was able to boom my audience international within a year to over 10,000 people. But here I learned a lot, and it was fun to do. It was mainly a creative outlet for me. and was simply also fun to involve my colleagues into this. If you want, these videos are still online. I think it's really cringeworthy for me to watch them, but it's kind of nostalgic for me. It's a perfect example to show you how everyone has to start somewhere. If I look back at my old stuff when I started doing science communication, I think like, oh, Martin, what are you doing? But it's a perfect example also for me to show to other people. I never delete old stuff online. So from where I came from, because it's easy to say when someone is in a position like I am, like, okay, it's probably talent or he got lucky. No, I put a lot of work in getting where I am today, and I still put a lot of work outside of my job into science communication and learning stuff about it. And I also have a bonus next to the 5 E's, and that's that you can build relationship and trust by doing science communication. This is a really important one to me, especially in the last decade. It became more important. Although when you look at the science barometer of the government, which they where they take the opinion of different groups of people and see how they look to science, there's still a high trust in science and scientists. But when you look at the international scale and the broader scale of science and science communication, you see that there's a lot of mistrust of people also towards the science, and it's only getting worse because, like I said in the beginning, when you have a lot of accessibility to information, it's not necessarily good information. Like, people can hijack it, which you see with nowadays. The anti-vaccine debate is a real problem because there are people who like to, I call it, misguide, influence, even manipulate other people from a position of power to do their bidding, as to say so, by using scientific information wrongly and trying to add people to their group of, for example, anti-vaxxers. But you can do this for a lot of things, like flat earthers as well, chemtrail people, lizard people. There are like a bunch of conspiracy theories, but this is, for me, this also comes from a point that people listen to humans, to other humans, to people that they know and that they trust. I see this a lot, and it even surprised me that the effect was this big when I started half a year ago on TikTok. And now I have a rather big community on TikTok of mainly high school children, also some adults that are following me. And they're really like, okay, I trust you. If you say something is like this, I trust that you did the research, that you know what you're talking about, and that this is correct scientific information, and I will listen to you. So that shows the power of being present as a scientist and doing science communication, because people will listen to you, and people will trust you. You will also get a bit of hate, of course, but that's with everything that you put yourself out there. But you also have the opportunity to build a relationship with other people and build trust in science and scientists. And we often underestimate the impact we can have through science communication on people's life. You also have a lot of impact, of course, as a scientist by doing research. But this is a way to have a direct impact on people's life. So these were the 5 E's on why you can do science communication. So it can be eye-opening, it can be educational, it can be empowering, it can be enthusing, and it can be entertaining. So these are 5 things why you can start a journey in science communication. And it can also be a combination of all these 5 things. They're all equally important in my eyes, but these are, for me, like 5 big pillars within science communication of why we can or should do it. And then the $1 million question is, for science communications all over the world, what is good science communication? If we would know the answer, we probably wouldn't sitting here today. But there are multiple ways to address these questions, and there are multiple answers. So many questions, so many answers that I would not be able to put this in this lecture. But there are different things that you can learn in becoming a good science communicator. And for example, you can see this on the SciComm Academy website of SciMingo. They have different workshops in podcasting, in video presentations, in writing, also in the next lectures. You can put science communication tips for every outlet, for every way of communication, for every audience. So it's different for every situation. But there are a couple of things, in my opinion, that are universal, regardless of the topic or communication route that you are taking. So let me show this by an example. So in fact, this is the very first science communication that I did in my life, the one that started it all, as you say. So it was back in 2014. I just started my PhD, and one of my fellow students said, hey, there's this science communication comedy competition organized by a university. I think it will be fun to do it. I'm going to do it. You should do it too. And I was tempted because I enjoyed science. I enjoyed comedy, but combining the two, I did not even know, am I funny or not? But it had a workshop by a comedian, Bas Birker. You can see him here on the picture. He's the guy in the middle there. And I saw an opportunity to learn something new, and I thought, check, count me in. It was a roller coaster, and I ended up winning the damn thing, which I did not expect when started it. But I tasted science communication. I liked it, and I continued. There was the first thing I did, and now I'm sitting here in front of you as a professional science communicator. I never imagined it when starting my PhD. I had two routes back then in my head. I either going to be a professor, or I'm probably going to go more in industry, and then probably consulting, because I like problem solving and variation in my job. So that was an idea. And then science communication was put on the table. I thought like, hey, I can do this. But back then I had no clue how I wanted. I had zero experience. I was an amateur. I never did science communication before. But now looking back of it, I knew why I won. Because I paid unknowingly back then attention to these three important things. And the first one is know thy audience. I know who I was talking to, fellow scientists, personnel of the university. So I catered my jokes to make them relatable to them. Plus, I know there was some basic science knowledge there, so I knew this is the knowledge level of my audience. I also had a good understanding of the topics that they found interesting. I knew what they came for. They wanted to have a good time, not to be lectured about my research. This is one of the most important things, that you know your audience. This is also something that I researched later on unknowingly when I did the science battle for kids, which I showed you earlier. Back then I went to my mother, who is a kindergarten teacher, and I asked her, okay, what do the kids these days like? Back then it was the Minions, so I catered my whole presentation around the Minions, and tried to share my research with them through that way. But it's one of the biggest mistakes that I still see scientists make. They're way too self-centered. They make science communication for themselves. They make a presentation or write a piece, and they think, oh, I think this is funny. I think this is relatable. They put in some obscure show that they watch, and they think, oh, I put a reference from this as kind of an anecdote or a metaphor, and they never ask themselves, okay, the people who will come to my presentation or who will read this piece, do they know what I'm talking about? We often focus on jargon, which of course you have to get rid of the jargon, but we think, okay, the jargon is gone. Now it's understandable and fun and relatable for everyone, but that's just one aspect for your audience. Yes, you can make an understandable presentation and still make no connection at all with your audience. So you have to be aware of this your whole journey. I always call this a mistake that I often see. I call this the Apollo launch effect. You have a great start in the presentation, which we come back in the next point. And then you leave people. You skyrocket into the sky with a great start of your presentation. You may do something relatable, and then the rest of everything, you go into this focus mode of things that you find funny, understand, and your audience is just left with like the cloud of the rocket, and they look up and they are not along the journey to space with you. So you cannot just leave it at a good start or just removing jargon. You have to constantly be aware what your audience is. And this is also an important thing when choosing which form, through which form to do science communication. Often we cannot choose it. For example, if you participate in an event that your university is organizing, or you have to do an interview for television, it's a format, you have to do this type of format. Then it's really clear. But I often always see people organize things themselves or start doing science communication. For example, an event on campus, a lecture, and they say like, okay, I do not reach the audience that I want to reach. I often see this when they say, we want to reach more kids and make kids enthusiastic, and we organize a festival on our university. And then I ask them like simply, do you think that teenagers will come to this science festival at university? No, you have to go where your audience is. You have to know if your audience is somewhere there. You have to go there. For example, that's why I started doing TikTok, because of fun, but also because I know the next generation of people who will consume our media, but also who will look up to certain science communication and scientists, they are on TikTok. A perfect example of this for the people a bit older in the room, in my opinion, is Lieve Scheere, which is the most well-known science communication in our country and even across the borders. But back then, he started doing science communication also after his comedy years through the format which he knew, knowingly or unknowingly, that people were watching. And that was television back then. Everyone watches television. All families gather around this tube through which images are projected and sounds are made. I remember back then, we all sat with the whole family and watched TV programs. So that was where everyone was back then for science communication. Now it's social media, especially TikTok. And almost there aren't any scientists on TikTok. I know because I'm there. I'm the only one currently there. So they often say like, okay, we do these all types of events, but we never reach teenagers or kids. How can we change that? Yeah, okay, go to where your audience is. Know thy audience, and you have to adapt to them. They don't have to adapt or come to you. And then they say like, okay, is there a market for stuff like TikTok? Let my account be an example that kids are interested in science communication. These are we are now almost at 61,000 followers in just over half a year time. So teenagers are really interested in science. Don't let people tell you otherwise, but it takes a lot of work. I was able to reach these numbers by at least producing at my high point 3 to 5 videos a day. So this channel has an half a year time, over 600 videos on it. Social media and science communication is hard work. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. But back to my science slam story. The second thing is know thy story. You have to be able to tell a good story regardless of the outlet that you use. I read my research in something that was relatable to my audience, the search for love. There were a lot of people my age, like 20s, 30s. So how do we get into the club? How do we score a girl or a guy as a scientist? So I drenched it in some shows that were popular, like Big Bang, How I Met Your Mother, and a lot of jokes at my expense and made it relatable in this way. So I told a story. And there are basically 3 pillars for a good story, which I use in all my presentation: a captivating beginning, a structured middle part, and a clear ending. A captivating beginning, you have to blow their socks off. You have to make them curious before you be giving them the information. Not like a lengthy introduction, like you write for an article. No, just like a joke, you have to have a build-up, and then in the end you can deliver the punchline. You also have to make it relatable. You can make it human. For example, a great example to do is, you can, instead of focus on the science part, you can focus, if you explain something about the human part. There are often interesting stories about the scientists that made discoveries, and you can go from that part. Or I once heard from another science communicator that she went to a lecture, and it was actually a conference talk, which makes it even more interesting for me. And the person did not start with the general introduction outline of the presentation, but he started with, okay, a colleague from mine from abroad came to my lab and we wanted to solve a problem. And we only had like 2 or 3 weeks time to solve it. And then he took them on a journey of all the hassles that they went through. Will they make it in time? Will they not make it in time? At the end, something went wrong. Oh, and they made it. And this was the conclusion of his science experiment. So, which is a really captivating beginning and then a story. And of course, it has to be audience oriented, like I said. And then you have to have this structure middle part. Like I said, this guy had the perfect flow of a story. He had structured parts like timelines that he had to get while doing his research with his colleague. But this is often also the part where you lose your audience, because you go to like in an automation mode. Because almost everyone knows by now the tip, like you have to have a captivating beginning, and then, okay, I made my captivating beginning. It's like the Apollo rocket. Now I can just do the science part. No, you have to keep it structured, make it interesting, switch tempos, do some in-depth, because you can go in depth. You have to go in depth actually, and then do some lighter work. And then you have to have a clear ending. I hate open endings in TV shows, in movies. There's nothing worse than an open ending to me, even if you have a next season or stuff like that. Don't do it. Everyone wants closure. And all of this has to be packaged in a perfect balance of facts and story. So it has to be also scientifically factual correct. And then the last part is know thyself. You have to be yourself, but also you have to be clear on what you want to achieve. This is something that goes wrong for so many science communicators. They are not honest to themselves in front what you want to achieve, because based on what you want to achieve, you have to use certain science communication outlets, certain science communication formats. You have to pick certain audiences. For example, for my Science Slam story, I know what I wanted to achieve. I wanted to make people laugh. I succeeded, and that's why I won. But I didn't went into there like, oh, I want to lecture people about my research and I want to win a prize. No, I just wanted to make people laugh and have a good time. But it can also be, of course, other things. You want to be able to be in certain boards, to have influence with politicians, to guide their decision making. Or you can just be like me and you want to inspire people. But based on that, you have to make certain decisions, and you have to know what you want and what you want to achieve. Otherwise, you will not be able to succeed in science communication, because there are people, they do all kinds of different stuff, and then they say, okay, like, no, science communication, it doesn't work. That's because you never were honest for yourself and you didn't know what you wanted to achieve. Something what is also important in know thyself is know thy preferences. You have to know what you're good at and what you like doing. I tried a lot of stuff, and I ended up for most of the things that I like was videography, presenting, and social media. And that's stuff that I focused on. I also, of course, for my job, try to get more experience in stuff like writing and things like that. But you can, for example, combine your interest with science communication. I see people doing art, making comics about science, combining their interest for music with science. So there are really different ways that you can do science communication, and the most powerful ways are often the things that you're passionate about and combining them with science. I always see these people succeed. And one also final thing with know thyself is that you have to evaluate. We are scientists, or you are interested in science if you are watching this. And one of the key things in science is that if you do an experiment, you have to evaluate the results and come to a conclusion. So if you do something, go evaluate yourself. What did I do? Can I do it better? Did I achieve the results that I wanted to get? Or do I have to do it differently? For example, if you start on social media with the TikTok thing, I tried a whole lot of different stuff to see what worked, evaluate it, see what the audience liked, not what I like doing. And then I started doing more of that. And then in the end, it's just start doing it, because practice makes perfect. If you go watch that YouTube channel, you will see how I started. And yeah, in all honesty, I think I'm better now than I was back then, because I tried a lot of things also during my journey. I did a lot of workshops. Back then, we also did not have a lot of science communication workshop available. There was only this Let's Talk Science conference, and then some doctoral school lectures. Nowadays, you have a whole lot of things. Like, for example, now the SciComm Academy Academy. I would be thrilled if that was present in my day, because I can learn a lot of stuff through this way. But by doing it, you become better and better and better. For an example, Steven van Gucht, who started in the beginning of the corona pandemic, and Steven van Gucht communicating now are two different people. Just by doing it a lot, he became a good science communicator in his field, and he knows how to communicate nowadays. And then the final thing is, of course, that a lot of people ask me through my journey as a science communicator is, what are the benefits? And for me, this is a very difficult one to answer, because in my opinion, it's different for everyone. Everyone's science communication journey and the benefits they get out of it will be different. If your goal is research based, as a researcher, then I'm a very bad example of what to do as a science communicator. I would not advise you at all to do what I do. But we can also go to this in depth a bit more in Q&A if you have questions about it. So this depends on knowing thyself and know what you want to achieve. And there you can have some benefits. If you're researcher based, I always use an example, my wife, which I coached back then, Hannelore. She's not a researcher anymore. But through using science communication, different aspects, being present on social media, presenting your research at science communication initiatives, she was able to build expertise around her as a scientist and network with different groups within Belgium as well as internationally, and became known for research in soot particles. Also won a lot of prizes through that way by communicating really focused in a certain way to promote herself as a researcher. I think when you do science communication as a researcher with that aspect, one of the benefits is, or one of the things that you have to keep in mind everywhere you go, you yourself, you are a brand. You are a brand. Never forget that. Whatever you do, everything that you do reflects back on you and your expertise that people know you for. For example, during my science communication things, I was able to do television, radio, even a speech in front of the king, but I was also use my science communication to promote our group and make networks with other scientists for the PRD group back then, the Polymer Reaction Design group. I saw that by doing Twitter, that a lot of my co-researchers had more citations on their research because other scientists became aware of their research. So science communication can also be useful to promote yourself as a brand, as a researcher. It also has a lot of transferable skills. There's never wrong with learning how to communicate. And like I said, networking is something to do. And one of the main benefits to me was that it was a lot of fun to do, good vibes. I had more networking opportunities through doing science communication than to going to conferences or spending every waking hour in the lab. I met so many interesting people. I had collaborations because of science communication for my research part. And I also had opportunities later on in life, like my current job, because I did science communication. I met artists, I met illusionists, I organized TEDx conference. I even went, you can see this picture here, to Tomorrowland, together with a scientist who was also a DJ. So I made a piece on him combining his music together with his research, which was awesome. So I was able to spend the day VIP behind a DJ booth at Tomorrowland, which was a unique experience. This was before the pandemic, but I also met a lot of people internationally, like you see in the right, below right corner. I was able to help other scientists network and stuff like that. So it's also science communication. One of the benefits is good vibes and getting to know people. And that's a bit of the story of me today on why you should do science communication, what good science communication is, and if there are benefits for science communication. I always, if you're passionate, if you have passion for science and you want to share it, go do science communications. For me, it's one of the best things. I'm a bit biased, but it's an amazing opportunity that you can do in your career as a scientist. So that was it for me today for this opening lecture. Thank you very much already for listening. And if there are any questions, feel free to ask them to the Q&A.
Indeed. Well, great. Thank you very much, Martijn, to talk about your personal journey in science communication. I found it very interesting. I can imagine that some people have questions, so do not hesitate to ask them through the Q&A. This way we'll make sure to pass them to Martijn. I would even suggest, if that's okay for you, to perhaps give the floor to people who are interested in asking a question. So not do it via the chat, but invite people to join by video. Okay. I see a first reaction, but it's simply a compliment. Amazing talk. Thank you, Martijn.
Thank you.
Well, perhaps while we are waiting on some questions to pop up, Martijn, I perhaps have a question. You talked about how you handle things when doing science communication, what you find important in how to structure your message with the captivating start, and you talked about this interesting metaphor, the Apollo launch effect. But then you talked about the fact that you're a fan of closed endings, and that's something that you personally would definitely advise people to do when engaging in science communication. But isn't that a hard thing to do sometimes? Because of course, science or research is sometimes it's often unfinished. It's constantly evolving. So your research, it's further research is needed. How does that? How can you deal with that when doing science communication and talking about your research? How would you advise to move forth on that?
That's a good question, and something, of course, given the continuity of science, that can be tricky. But I still think that whenever you give a talk or a presentation on a certain topic, because you when you define the message or the end conclusion that you want to give with your talk, you structure your story around it, and by that you can make a finalized story, in the sense that the story that you're telling during your presentation can have a closed ending, but that doesn't mean that your research has ended, of course, so that there's nothing more to do, and there's nothing wrong to say like, okay, we're still going to do that, of course. It also depends, of course, of the formats. When you have like you have a one story opportunity, that's more difficult. So there I would certainly advise it. But for example, when you are present on social media, you can also make a story about how science is continuous. I see this also a lot when scientists are explaining to people the difference behind a theory in real life and a theory in science, because a theory in science is something that is experimentally proven, has a lot of foundation of science. So they explain here in a story kind of way why theories in science are not the same as theories in real life. And they also explain things like how science is continuous, but they always do it in like a closed off story. If that makes sense. Always, it's for me. It's whenever I do a presentation, I know it's not finished. The research, for example, if I will take a very concrete, a very specific example. A few weeks or a few months back, we did an explainer in VTM News about the pig kidney that they implanted in a human for the first time ever. Of course, it's a continuous research. There's still a lot to do, but you have a clear story. The doctors did this. They achieved it by altering this genes of the pig, and this was the end result. That's the finalized story in its sense. And then in the outro, of course, I have the opportunity to stay to step of our news anchor, like, okay, that was the first step. It's going to be exciting to see how this will evolve in the future, because there's still a lot to do. But you still have that finalized bulk of a story in which you gave a message to the people. I would not put that as an end. Okay, to make this very very specific, imagine if you watch the Marvel movies. You have a closed story at the end, but then you have the end credits, and after that there's like this teaser piece, which is like a teaser to a next movie or a continuation of the story. So that is a way that you can still, through that teaser at the end, say to people like, there's still more to come. We still have a lot to do. The journey isn't over, but the movie in itself, it's done. It should be a finished story. I hope that's that's a better way of framing it.
Thank you for including Marvel to make your point. I see one question pop up by Piali asking whether you could repeat the 5 E's. He only got 4 of them, but missed out on one. So if you can give a brief summary.
Okay, perhaps. So the 5 E's, I will go over them as eye-opening. By doing science communication, you can open people's eyes for the world of science, as well as your research. It can be educational. You can provide access to information that would otherwise be not available to people, as well as you can educate yourself. It can be empowering by educating people around you. You give them, you empower them to make better decisions, which can be very important. You can make them enthusiasm for science. You can inspire the next generation, and you can be entertaining because it also has to be or can be fun to do science communication. So these are the 5 E's: eye-opening, educational, empowering, enthusing, and entertaining. So these are the 5 E's that we talked about in the beginning. But I also understood from Arnoud that this presentation, you can rewatch it afterwards. So you can go back to it then.
Indeed, Martijn, we have recorded the presentation. I will make it available via our YouTube channel and the SciComm Academy website. Meanwhile, they started working here. They're renewing the pavement in my street, so I have a background noise. I don't see any other questions pop up, so I think we can wrap this talk up. But yeah, simply, I would suggest you can follow or find Martijn through I think almost all social media. He's also very active on Twitter, and I think he's very reachable. So don't hesitate if questions, if you still have questions later on to get in touch with him. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to.
Yeah, sure. Feel free to reach out to me. Also, if there are scientists watching and you have interesting science news, definitely contact me. But I'm always available. Like Arnoud said, you can contact me anywhere from LinkedIn to Twitter to TikTok. I'm not on Tinder. You cannot find me there. And also not on Snapchat. But Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok. Feel free to reach out. Like I said, I think science, communication, knowledge should be available to everyone also.
Yeah, we totally agree.